when my brother Joey lived near right next door to Flatirons Mall up in Boulder, and I think it was when Joey and I and a friend Mike Kirka we were starting to move him into the townhouse, and May came over with a plate of cookies or brownies of some kind and left that with us. I think she could tell we were all very hungry men lifting furniture, and Joey and I were starting to bicker at each other because we get hangry. And when we get hangry, he and I never really saw eye to eye. And that's where our friendship began. And over the years, there were times that we lost contact, because how life can happen. And back in May 2022, there was a tornado that ripped through the Highlands Ranch area. And that's where May and her family of three and her husband at the time were living. And I texted the May to check in and see if everybody was okay. What I didn't realize in that moment was the life that May was going through. And I'll share a piece later on after May shares her powerful story why this nearly broke me. Because the story that May has is a story of true grit, strength, resilience, a mother who never gave up, who screamed through the base camp when nobody was listening. But she had the strength within herself to stand up for what she believed, and she wrote a book that is changing the world. And she has been with us from the very beginning. And when I say I'm protective of certain people within my life, May and her three kids have fallen under that umbrella because I've known her firstborn since she was a little teeny tiny baby when we went camping, and they have become very close and dear in my life and to Joey's life. So with that being said, family, this is May's sixth climb to the summit, and I'm always honored when she comes back. May, the stage is yours.
Thank you. That was such a nice introduction. I see some familiar faces and names on here, so it's good to see people again or meet new people. And I appreciate, David, how you, with each of these summits, have, there is kind of that golden thread of connection. You always make sure, that your brother is a big part of all of the work that you do. And also, right, that we kind of focus on different things. And I know that when we talked, kind of about the theme for this one, that it was a lot still about that grief and loss. And, kind of a big part of that is what you do after the grief and loss. And about a little bit about myself, my background. I work as a social worker. I have a master's degree in social work and work with people all day, every day that experience grief and loss and trauma. And when it happened to me, I was blindsided by it. I think we often know how to help other people and we don't know how to help ourselves. And we get really stuck in these ruts. And I had frequently looked at grief and loss as death, right? And I'm talking, physical death, when somebody is no longer alive and breathing. And I would kind of compartmentalize grief and loss into that box, right? Of that somebody passed away, somebody is no longer living. And I mean, that was such a disservice to myself and anybody that I worked with and interacted with, because we experience so many other types of loss without it necessarily meaning death. And so at the end of 2022, my ex-husband was arrested for domestic violence and assault. He was charged with 5 felonies and 4 misdemeanors. and there was an immediate protection order put in place. And I knew at that time that there was no way, on this planet that we could reconcile. It had gotten to a point, I mean, there were child abuse charges, for things happened with our children. It had just reached a fever pitch. And I knew that kind of life as I knew it was over, but I didn't really think of it in terms of of grieving. And what I really had to deal with was grieving this life that I thought I was going to have and that I had poured into. I was married for 19 years. We met in high school. It was like my whole life, and this projection of what I thought it was going to be and what I wanted it to be. I had to bury that. That was a fantasy. That wasn't reality at all. I lost my husband, the person that I thought was, my best friend and, my teammate and my partner, even though he's still alive, right? I mean, for all intents and purposes, like for me, he's not. And, a big part of my grief process was my children's grief. They also lost their father. They had contact for a couple of years, like through professional supervision because of all of the criminal stuff. And we had a big criminal trial. It was a week long. I had to testify for like 8 hours one day. It was not a fun time. And he was found guilty and he was sentenced to 12 years to life in prison. And that was a conversation I never thought that I would have to have with my children. Not only his arrest, but all of these subsequent things. And I have advocated to keep my kids in counseling because through each life event, this is going to come up for them, right? That their father is no longer in their lives. And not only that, but it's, the circumstances surrounding it. This really was a conscious choice made. These were actions he continued to engage in. He was incredibly selfish, in my opinion, right? And chose himself over his children. And, I think my oldest is graduating and she is getting ready to go to college. And I think about when she meets people at college, right? It's very normal to talk about, where are you from? What's your family like? Do you have siblings, your parents, whatever? What is she going to say? And I mean, it's her story to tell. She can say what she would like, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's something very just general of like, oh, like my dad's not in the picture, versus diving into the circumstances around it. But that is, a loss that she is going to have to continue to contend with, throughout parts of her life, especially, we know a lot of people whose families are divorced, people who co-parent, that is not what our situation is at all, right? She doesn't have any relationship with him. There is a permanent protection order in place between her and her father for the rest of her life, right? So, just kind of looking at this, she had to grieve really the loss of her father, and so did my sons. And I mean, it's just got so much bigger, right? His family, who we were incredibly close with, they don't speak to us at all anymore, and they lost that entire side of their family, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins. It was profound. There have been times when my kids have said to me how much easier they feel like it would be if their father had died, right? That feels like a grief or something that they felt like they could handle more than what we all have been dealing with. I sometimes get frustrated when people, say like, oh, but, kids, so strong, so resilient. I mean, my kids, they're incredible humans. I know we all are biased. We all think our kids are great, and they are, right? And I think that dismisses so much of their experience and their journey and their healing. And so I try to make a big effort to, two things can be true at the same time. They can be very strong and resilient, and they can be very much struggling with what is happening. And that was where I found myself too. I mean, I didn't want to be in a relationship where I was physically in danger and that my kids were physically in danger, being threatened with firearms and with guns. And I didn't want to live like that. And I also didn't want to get a divorce. I didn't want to not have my family together. It's wildly confusing when you're dealing with all of these things. And, so dealing with loss from like all different angles too. We lost our family home. It went into foreclosure. It was, I mean, I heard I'm sorry, wait, where's your name now? The who just spoke before, Dr.
Oliver Reed.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Reed was saying, like it is one thing after another, and we can approach those as opportunities, right? But it truly is, right? As soon as you finish something, the boulders keep rolling down on you, and we just keep pushing them back up the hill, right? Because we're strong, empowered people, we're motivated to do that. And it's funny too how I've talked now to a lot of people that have gone through divorce or relationships that have ended, and how frustrated they are when people, it's like the first question out of somebody's mouth is like, are you dating again? What are you thinking about that? And it's like, we put so much, I think, like social expectations on people to just like couple up and, be in a relationship. And it's like, whoa, we really got to pump the brakes here. We got to focus on ourselves or our children, our family, right? Whatever. And what we want is a partner to add to our lives, right? And not just have somebody to fill a spot or check a box or to be able to post on Facebook, right? Like, I found somebody who will tolerate me, right? And so I just hate that question, and I always encourage people to just kind of, don't even give it credit of a response. Really, just say like, that's not what's important here, folks. And, naturally, it does, I think, come up. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about today when we talk about like healing and moving on, right? Especially like my youngest, when his dad was arrested, was 5 years old. His world was extremely black and white. Everybody he knew had a mom and a dad, even if they didn't live in the same house, right? It was they saw each other, and he would ask questions and he would say things like, well, like, am I getting a new dad? Like how does this work here? And, we would have a lot of conversations about that. And again, my kids are spread out in age, so their different perspectives were so fascinating to me. I loved actually getting to experience some of that with them. And but people do kind of want to know like, well, what are you thinking about moving on? And I will say, for months and months, the thought of having to like engage in a relationship felt so overwhelming and exhausting. And that was a huge thing for me to say that, like, obviously then you're not ready, right? If the thought of that is, even if it was with, like the prince of whatever, like, no, just absolutely not. That sounds awful. And it was surprising to me when after some time I thought, like, well, maybe. And I know like David and I would have conversations and I would say, it was my own insecurities. Like, why would anybody ever want to get involved in a relationship with somebody who, has an ex-husband in prison, who is a pretty threatening, intimidating, scary person who, if you're involved with me, you might be putting yourself at risk in some way, or your family or your children, and not to mention the fact that trying to get a divorce from my ex, I mean, it cost years of my life. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It bankrupted me. The house was gone. I mean, it was extreme. And so to say to somebody, hey, I have a lot of baggage and financial stress. And, like, why would anybody want to hitch their horse to this wagon? I would get really depressed about it. And again, not even that I wanted to move on, but just from a healing perspective, I was in the dumps about what my life looked like. And it took a lot of work and, therapy to come out on the other side of that and to say, to really reframe things. And, like what Dr. Reed just said too, like, what did you gain from your hardship? I mean, I gained myself. In hindsight, and of course, always 2020, I am appalled that what I thought was love and safety and intimacy were those things. It could not have been further from the truth. And I am so grateful, right, for my experience that I've been able to see true love and how love shows up. And I'm not just talking in a romantic sense. I'm talking, with friends and family and, people who truly just love you because you exist, right? You are worthy of love just because you're here, right? You don't need to earn love. I mean, that was a huge, huge thing for me in my journey. And so a big part of it, like healing, moving on, learning to love again for me was learning to love myself again. And I know that is maybe so basic and it's true. I think there is a lot of truth in those cliches and some of those, like phrases that we all hear all the time. The only way out is through and whatever, but it's true. Even though in the moment I feel like generally we despise like hearing those things, right? It's like, don't tell me, I don't want to hear it, but there's truth in those things. And so that was, a big thing for me was feeling that I loved myself enough and valued myself enough to share kind of like my experiences in my life again. And so I did, David mentioned I wrote a book and I put everything out there. And it's so funny to me when my ex-husband was first arrested, I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody. Which is like, this is going to blow over. Like, nobody needs to know. I was mortified, didn't want to admit any of these things had happened. Right. And then, now, years later, I'm like, hey, I am laying everything out in this book and it's raw and real and vulnerable. And I'm not sugarcoating things. And I'm telling people about how I sat in the dark on the closet floor, just wanting to give up, crying, trying to just get to the next day and the thing, and it's just, I'm very proud of myself that I went from, nope, nobody can know to like, no, this is what happened. And I really have nothing to be ashamed of. And, I'm proud of the person that I am in all of this now. And, I trust myself. And even so, then I did eventually start dating again for a lot of reasons. One, I felt, kind of that I maybe was ready to test the waters again. But I also, I do have younger children and I wanted them to at least have the opportunity to maybe see like a healthy relationship, right? And I was not willing to, rush into anything for that or to compromise any of my boundaries or my needs in that. But, I said, let me just kind of see what's out there. And I remember when I started dating again, I would like take notes back to my therapist and say like, okay, he like watched me get into the car before he went back inside. Is that weird? And, she would say like, no, that sounds like he was probably just making sure that you, safely got to your car. That sounds normal. It's like, okay. Okay. And I'm like, oh, he texted me like the next morning. Is that weird? Is that, because I still at the beginning didn't really trust myself to say, in the past, with my ex, the love bombing started immediately, the manipulation, the control, and it is such a slow burn, right? That you don't know that it's happening until you're drowning in it. Right. And so, I would ask her all of these questions, and she was so patient and kind with me. I mean, I recommend her as a therapist to anybody that's looking, but she worked with me through that journey of trusting myself again. And, then we slowly worked in things like introducing the kids. And it has been so refreshing. With my ex-husband, I would pick my kids up from school and we'd be in the car and they would say, like, is dad home? And if I said yes, like shoulders stay up, they stay like pretty tense. They know when they go inside, they have to find him. They need to, check in with him. They need to ask how he is. They have to give him a hug and kiss. They're not able to relax in their environment. And, to see the polar opposite then of having like a safe human in the home with them, right? And they come in, they're themselves, they throw their stuff on the floor instead of thinking, I got to put my stuff away immediately, and then because we have to, I'm like, hey, is that where your shoes go? No, okay, please pick them up. But at least they feel safe enough to, be themselves. And to hear my kids like banter or make jokes, whereas with their biological father, right, it was, you couldn't do that. He would twist everything you said. You were in trouble for existing, it was. So it's been very refreshing for me. And just again, I feel like proud of myself that I kind of took a chance, and that, I mean, I feel lucky too that it seems to be like healthy. And again, I told everybody kind of everything at the beginning of dating. I'm like, not just my therapist, but like, hey guys, this is what happened. We think this is good. Yep. Like, I'm not covering up for anybody anymore. I spent so many years of my life doing that, making excuses, just kind of even feigning ignorance if something like, oh, I don't know why that would have happened, when I knew exactly why it happened. I also have been working with some of the local schools to get in to talk to younger people about safe dating and, what that looks like, because I didn't know and I didn't have the vocabulary for it. And I think now, naturally, they're evolving in some of those like health classes. They do talk about some of these things that we now know are intimate partner violence and domestic violence, and how many people it affects, and to remove a lot of the shame in there, right? Like the victim blaming of it. And I think, that has been really incredible to hear feedback from younger people, because when I first started down that path, I thought, if I'm a young person, I'm going to see an adult and I'm going to say, you don't know. My story is different from yours. You probably did something stupid. I'm never going to end up in a situation like that. Like, you don't know my relationship. He's different. I really tamed this one, or whatever, stories teenagers tell themselves that guilty, did it too. But it's been so cool for these younger people to say, like, wow, that is like crazy. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that, I don't end up in a situation like that. And if I'm feeling like maybe he's calling me too much, I might question that now. Or if he suddenly shows up at places when I'm hanging out with my friends, I might question that rather than think, jealousy is not love. This as young people, the way that we confuse all of the attention, right? This is control. This is love bombing. This is potentially dangerous for you. So that is something else. I've had a lot of people reach out saying, hey, I want to give you a heads up that I'm letting my older teenager read your book. And I just wanted to tell you because we have mutual, like our kids are friends or something. And I appreciate the heads up. But I mean, even from them, the feedback has been so great. And I mean, again, I'm biased. I think the book is really interesting. I think if I knew somebody who had been through even, like a fraction of what I'd been through, I would want to read that story. I mean, it's if everybody pulls out their phone right now, you can buy it on Amazon. Just kidding. But I think it's so important because we don't talk about these things. We don't know these things. And the other, like the majority of the book, sadly, is just trying to get a divorce. And that's one of the other things I've been working like through podcasts and things is raising awareness about the for profit method of family court and divorce court. It, I mean, it costs $20 to go get married, and it costs you like potentially your entire life to get a divorce. And that is so disgusting. And the post separation abuse, the legal abuse, the financial abuse, the smear campaigns. I mean, the things I had to read about myself, the questions. I had to sit in a deposition and answer questions about what forms of sex I like, how often I like to do those things. I mean, these things should not be allowed. I mean, it's just appalling. So there's that because I figured I knew getting a divorce from my ex, he was an attorney, his dad's an attorney, his brothers are attorneys. I knew it was going to be hard. I just didn't think it was going to be hard in the way that it ended up being hard. I thought it would be hard in that they would, not negotiate things. They wouldn't really work on kids' schedules. I didn't think I was going to have to be reading about how now that I filed for divorce, how I engage in sex acts for money and how I am a, over the counter pill popper and how I drive drunk with my children in the car. And these things that, I mean, you guys don't know me. Maybe I do those things, but I don't. And I mean, just so many mind games, so many, just a waste of everybody's time, money, and energy, so trying to raise awareness of that because truly I was a lamb to slaughter. I thought I'm going to go talk to like the divorce attorney and maybe the judge, and they're going to say, okay, this all makes sense. And what ended up happening, I was a stay at home mom. I was married to an attorney. I got court ordered to pay him spousal support, even while he was sitting in prison for what he did to me. Like, again, things you wouldn't think would ever happen on this planet. I will say the judge who ordered that off the bench now. There is also a new House bill in Colorado that victims of domestic violence don't have to pay their abusers. Again, like why that even had to be a law. But yeah, I mean, these are the things, right, that we are dealing with. And you just see this corruption everywhere. And so I'm trying really hard to kind of spread the word. And, when we look at like the Me Too movement or all of these people coming forward with like the Epstein files, right? Like it is rampant. And we need to hold people accountable. I mean, when Danny Masterson, the actor from that 70s show, was found guilty of rape and sentenced to like 30 years in prison, I mean, and Diddy, right? These things are groundbreaking. These are changing the way that society is viewing things and interacting with victims. And I'm just trying to, like keep up with that and get more help and more voice for victims. Because if you want to know why we don't speak up or why we don't call the cops, like read like one page of my book. That's about it, right? You're not believed, you're shamed. They, take your kids, take your house, take your identity. It's cruel what is done. So I'm going to circle back to the point of this whole conversation, right? I had to grieve like who I thought I was too, right? Like I lost myself in all of this. And I have worked really hard to come back. I know David, like, 3 years ago, I was like a pale, empty shell of like, I'm I'm a kind of a thinner person already, and I was 20 pounds lighter than I am right now. I mean, it was sick. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't, I'm trying to take care of myself and my kids and work, but as an actual living zombie, which I know is an oxymoron, but that's what I was. I wasn't able to like enjoy the fresh air or live, I wasn't actually living at all. And so, I have been able to kind of reclaim myself. I know who I am. I know the things that I want. I'm working hard to, achieve those things. I feel so grateful for the response I've received from the book and just, from people. I mean, it's kind of never ending. I got another text from the in laws about something else the other day. Like, it's kind of never ending, but also like I'm in a good place now, right? This healing does happen and it takes so much time. And that's another cliche that I hate that is true, but right, the only way out is through. We have to feel all of those feelings. I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't sit on the closet floor in the dark after everyone went to bed and just cry for hours. And, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be who I am. And that's somebody that I like probably for the first time in my life. So, that's kind of cool. um, but yeah, grief and loss are a part of life, and it's scary as we get older. I think we start seeing it more. People diagnosed with big things. We're losing parents or siblings. And, I mean, it's something we have to always deal with. And I think just being mindful of the fact that grief and loss are happening kind of in all avenues of our lives, even without, something big like that, and to give ourselves grace and time to really work through that. And it doesn't have to make sense to anybody else. If you need time for, whatever it is, your favorite coworker moving away, whatever, that is still a loss. You are allowed to take time and sit with that. You don't need to just put on a happy face to make other people feel more comfortable. And yeah, hopefully we can generate some change on those big scales as well and minimize the trauma and suffering people have to do when they are facing grief and loss in family court. But that's kind of my 2 cents on it. So thank
May,
you.
you're welcome, May. I gotta tell you, from 3, 4 years ago, the person you were back then to the person you are now, I love seeing the smile. I've always told you, you've always had a very beautiful smile. Um, and seeing the joy back in your life is been my intention from the very first dinner we had at Del Frisco's. And what was crazy, folks, was when May and I got together for dinner just to reconnect, apparently there was a PI took a photo of her going out to dinner with an old friend. That's how insane it was for her. And I've known her for over 20 years, like I said. But before we open it up to the Zoom room, just a couple things on my personal standpoint here, May. I'm insanely proud of you.
Thank
Like,
you.
it brings tears to my eyes. Like, I told you the story about Joey and what he said to me the week before my birthday. That's how much he loved you and cared about you. And I felt I broke that promise from 2018 to 2022, and that's something I don't take lightly. When I saw the video a week or two ago when you were in Florida with Maddie in the gymnastics, I didn't see that for 3 years. And seeing that now, seeing the joy in your daughter's smile, in your kids, your sons, and especially in you, it's incredible. You've overcome some overwhelming things. And everybody, I dropped a flow page link into the comments. This has a link to May's book on Amazon. It also has a link to her Facebook page. All 40 speakers, go to May's profile and start following her. Please. Because
Thank you. Yeah.
yeah, she's got a story.
And I added the book to Kindle Unlimited so people can, like read it for free if they have that as well. Um, yeah, I mean, and what kind of little history of what David is talking about. My oldest is a senior this year, and after her dad was arrested and she was placed as a protected party for the child abuse charge, um, she was in a really bad place herself, understandably, right? And she didn't leave her brother's room. She felt safe in her brother's room. She basically stayed there for a whole year. And what happened a couple weeks ago in Florida is she decided to switch from gymnastics, competitive gymnastics, to cheer. And we were in Florida for nationals, and she broke her foot. She broke her elbow this last year, and it's been a very hard season for her. And they did amazing, and they finished as a bronze medalist, which is a big deal. And somebody caught on camera when she saw me, and she just started crying, and I was crying, and because it was like, and I'm like, oh, she's back, like this is my kid, right? And yeah, it was I'm so grateful for that video. It was very special. Yeah, and I mean, we still have a lot of work to do and things to overcome, but it's been a good year.
And that's been my prayer for you for 4 years. You've been a rock in my life, a steady rock in my life, helping me through the injuries in the 8 years since losing Joey. And, you know, what you have done is incredible. So, everybody, get a copy of An Embarrassment of Pandas. Let's blow up this movement just like you helped me blow up Mountain Summit Virtual. I am bringing May back every single time because she has a powerful story like you. When she is willing and have time, of course, I'm not going to, have to do too much because I let her know 2 months in advance because she's a very busy mama bear. So we're going to kick this over because I can see other ladies and a bunch of hands standing up here that want to pour in, and Jeff, that want to pour into May. So I didn't see who hand went up first, so I'm going to just pick. Sierra, go.
My hand was up first. um, May, thank you for sharing your story. I've heard it a couple of times in different ways. Um, I grew up with an alcoholic, abusive dad, and my parents divorced 30 years ago. And my mom, jumped into a relationship, what people say, with a great man who has raised me for the past 30 years. And he is, my kid's papa. We're resilient. I ended up marrying someone who has a very narcissistic family as well. And now we're going through a divorce. He's not, that way, but, our kids are alienated from his side of the family. And I think the more outward you are with your story and the more open you are and inviting and emotionally intelligent and aware with your kids, we end up turning out really, really good. So don't feel like, you know, that you're doing anything wrong by being out, which I don't think you are, right? I don't think you feel that way, but keep sharing your story because, my mom was pretty open with everything throughout, the whole process. And she always worried, right? Did I mess you up? And I think I learned how to be a good parent from, I think someone said it earlier, how not to be, how I didn't want to be like my dad. So I parent my kids, complete opposite. But even with my kids now, I have 3 kids and going through this divorce, like I try to stay as open with them about the whole process too. And it's nice to see you on the other side of it. And even your energy now, dating, whatever it might be, like your energy feels so different and so much lighter from like the first time I saw you speaking. And that's just a reminder how amazing and impactful like the safe love can be. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for saying that. And I'll just like, I'm not an online coach or anything, but I am always happy to talk to people if they ever like, even if your divorce is nothing like mine, sometimes it can just be helpful, right? Like if anybody ever wants to reach out, I do check Instagram more than Facebook, but yeah, I'm always happy to talk to people about whatever.
And so before we go into the next person, everybody, let's try to keep everything to about 40, 45 seconds because I know May is extremely busy with work and
I
stuff.
told them I'd be late to the next one. It's okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I just wanted to point that out. So let's go to Jeff.
Hey May, I just want to thank you. Um, there was a similar situation in my family. It wasn't my father. It was his nephew, and it wasn't me. It was one of my siblings. Um, and we did lose that whole side of the family because they had a history of covering up what was going on. So, um, and there were multiple people that were abused. There were multiple people, and some of them came forward, and many of them did not. Um, and it was weird because the family that we lost was the family that was here, right? And my mom's family was in Philadelphia, so it was like Sundays. Every Sunday we were at my grandmother's house, probably for dinner, maybe not, but most likely. And everyone was there, and there was just this big, huge family and this blended family. So losing that, I know, can be such a thing, and being able to talk about that is very powerful. And I know that there were times where it might have felt um, difficult for you, and I just want to commend you for being that and standing in who you had to be to have that happen for you, um, to really protect your kids, because I know that that's not always easy. And losing both my parents last year, including the complicated relationship with my father, um, who at the time when that all happened, my parents were divorced and they later remarried. Um, and having that complicated relationship and the complicated stuff and having to go through all that, um, just being able hearing someone else having a parallel path sometimes is very helpful. You
And I
know,
think that's a big part of it is that we probably have a lot more in common than not, right? And you're right. We sometimes just feel so alone in that. And we get mixed messages, I think, too. It's like family, blood is thicker than water. And so when you choose to cut ties with family, I mean, it can feel like you really did something wrong. Whereas if, your coworker's being a turd or whatever, and you decide, like, I don't want a relationship with that person, nobody's going to bat an eyelash. Right. But when it's your family, people, it's like, and I think sometimes people are like, well, what does that say about you? Right. This is your family. There's a lot of layers there that complicate things. And yeah, like I said, I think it happens a lot more. And I'm sorry. I always say this, like, I'm sorry when people can relate, but also I'm glad that you can, right? Because we're not alone in that. And I'm sorry to hear about the loss of both of your parents too in a year. That's a lot.
thank
Thank
you.
you, Jeff. Thank you for that. We'll take one more. And Deb, why don't you finish this out before we move on to our next speaker?
May, well, I'm preaching to the choir. Monsters are real. And keep prioritizing yourself. Let's have a coffee, and I might have some information about how to pitch your book to Netflix or others.
That's been a goal, Deb. Thank you.
And also coordinate maybe with Mark and know how to physically protect yourself should the day come that he gets out.
Yes, thank you. I try not to, I'm trying real hard, you guys, to like live in the present moment, right? And not get wrapped up in what might be happening in, 10, 20 years if he ever gets out. But yeah, that's a little bit of makes you look over your shoulder. And I think I recently did a podcast called What Came Next, because it's really like never over, right? When you're dealing with some of these things. I still feel like I have to look over my shoulder sometimes, even though he's in prison because his family is not. And you hear stories every day about wild things like hitmen hired and you're right. So, but I try not to focus on those things, try to keep this positive aura here. But I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, and again, I know I'm biased, but I'm like, I would want to see my story, right? Like, I'd want to read my book. I'd want to kind of see this documentary on Netflix because it's like, I don't know, affluent white male who's an attorney, like in prison. Like, that doesn't happen very often, right? And yeah, just exposing some of those bad things. But I don't want to take up more time. I know you've got a schedule too, but thank
You're
you.
you're doing great, May, and I know you've got a busy schedule ahead of you, and I am always extremely grateful that you've been with us from the very beginning. But one thing that I have been working on since 2022, and I'm still adamantly working on this for her, Deb, if you have that Netflix connection, let's get on a call. I'll send you an embarrassment of Panda's manuscript because I have a copy of it. I was one of the ones that got to read through it and help May through this journey to get her book finalized. She worked with my publisher, and it was an absolute journey and privilege. The other dream that I have for May and her daughter, they're massive Taylor Swift fans. Like, they are Swifties to the max. And I need to get them to a concert. I made this promise to her in 2022 that I would do everything in my power to get them front row tickets at a Taylor Swift concert. And I'm going to do that. So if anybody knows any way to get in touch with Swift people, forget Kelsey. Kelsey can go take a hike because he's a Chiefs fan. But if anybody can make that dream happen for these two lovely ladies, that would be incredible. So I told you this, Trish, or May. Oh, shit.
You're fine.
May,
It's fine.
sorry.
You're all good. It's funny you say that though, because so in my book, if anybody has read it or wants to, I reference a lot of songs. Music was definitely my therapy. And I have a good friend who she saw the Eras tour 11 times. She flew all over the world. She's amazing. My friend is so cool. And she texted me after she was reading the book and she was like, the only person that should have been at the Eras tour was you. She was like, I cannot believe, she was like, these parallels, right? And we all see what we want to see. Maybe I'm like, Taylor and I are like this, right? But there are so many similarities that are just like, it's kind of shocking. But yeah, I mean, we got to see the Eras tour one time in Denver. Incredibly grateful. Like, memory that I'll never forget. That was amazing. But yeah, music is so powerful. I'm actually maybe pivoting my Instagram to dive into like lyrics and the healing power behind them. If anybody has interest in that, I don't know, but yeah.
You know, I'm in, May. I'm always behind you 100%. And we've got a movement here. And the lovely Raquel helped me with my song. But hopefully we can tap into other music industries and get some help on that point. So May, absolutely insanely beyond incredibly proud of you. And I know there's somebody up in heaven that is smiling down on what you have done, from even though we didn't know what you were going through years before this. You would know that if he and I knew what you were going through, we would have knocked that door down and moved you guys out of there and put you in a safe space. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for allowing me to come alongside you since 2022 and be a support to you and those three beautiful kids that you are raising. You're raising three amazing souls that are going to change this world. So you are phenomenal. Keep smiling and don't look over your shoulder anymore, because if anybody tries to come at you here in Colorado, there are people here that will keep them away from you. Okay? And there's an army behind you.
Well, thank you. Take care, everybody.